Welcome to Exploring the BABOK Guide. Episode 4, Requirements and Design. Thank you to everyone for joining us today to find out more about the IIBA's body of knowledge and to explore some of its concepts. Hi, I'm Maureen McVeigh, the Head of Learning and Development for IIBA. I've been a BA for many years, worked in various and sundry different activities, but my real passion is about sharing information and helping the business analysts to develop their profession. So I'm really pleased to be working with IIBA. I've had a lot of experience with the IIBA. I was one of the founding members way back in 2003. But a lot of my work coming up to this point has been around implementing off-the-shelf software and IT processes, as well as creating business analysis curriculum. But enough about me. Today's session is really around a whole series of webinars that address the body of knowledge, helping individuals to gain insight into the foundation of the profession itself, but also to give you an opportunity to expand your view and explore the body of knowledge from different perspectives. So an approach of a panelist discussing their particular points of view seems to be a great way for us to be able to engage as a community. So we look forward to your comments, your questions, and feel free to utilize the question box throughout the session. Today we're going to be discussing in episode 4, do BAs do design? So don't forget to use that question box and include some of your perspectives on business analysis and design. We're going to have a lively panel discussion today. We're going to talk about the role of the BA in design, requirements and design, how does that all fit together? What does the business need, the solution, and design have to do with each other? And of course, we're going to present your questions and comments to our panelists. But first, let's introduce our panelists. I'm really pleased to have Janet Wood with us. She's a hardworking lady. She's been in IT for 40 years. And the last 12 as a BA, and her passion for business analysis is unsinkable. I tell you, she's been working at the chapter in South Africa. She works with banks in South Africa, and she is the chapter president. She received her CBAP in 2011, and she's also writing version 3 of the BABOK Guide. She's committed to promoting the profession of business analysis. So welcome, Janet.
Thank you. Here I am.
Hello. Whoops. I'm sorry about the slides. I'll get it down. Scott Selhorst. I'm really pleased to have Scott with us. He has been working in software products for many, many years and started Tyner Bain in 2005. Lots of discussion on his blog. He's strategy, he's a management consultant, and has worked in and with many different teams, delivering millions of dollars of value to the customer. And so thank you, Scott, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Thank you. And of course, today we have Julian. Julian is the Head of Research and Innovation at IIBA. Not only is he helping the BA profession by doing research and providing us as business analysts with a lot of thought-provoking information, but through his quick tips, managing business analysts, publication and understanding the BABOK Guide, but also many of his articles and the communications webinars that he also hosts. He's a busy guy, and he's also ahead of the BABOK version 3 guide and a core member team and contributing editor. You're pretty busy, Julian.
Yes, and with this brand new role, as of a week and a half ago to Head of Research and Innovation. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what all the details of that will be. I do know that there's going to be white papers and surveys and research for corporate members and lots of other stuff like that coming up. So life is definitely exciting here at IIBA.
Yeah, lots of good stuff coming out soon. So thanks. So don't forget to post your opinion of do BAs do design in the questions box. And I'm going to now turn it over to Janet.
Okay, can you hear me?
I think it's Scott first.
Those are Janet's slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies.
It's okay. Can you hear me now?
You're on.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about what our BA is doing in design. So that's the first slide you can go on. And you'll see there's some examples of design. And the question we're asking is, what is design? So in traditional IT projects, we think of design as being the job done by a systems analyst or designer when they take the requirements, map them to systems, and prepare functional program specs for a developer to code from. But in the bigger world, design's not only about how something is going to be built, it's also about what it's going to look like, colors and textures, how it will perform. So considering the Lamborghini we've got up there, although the shape of the bonnet and the construction of the engine are both elements of design, we don't expect the same designer to do both. The shape is unquestionably a design decision, but it is far more in the business space of what the business people see when they're talking about their new product. And it applies to all of these items. They're all aspects of design, although not all of them relate to a technical design perspective. And design is even included in my choice of using black images for all the different pictures you see there. These are all aspects of design. So I propose that design can be a requirement too. And that's the next slide. So design can be a requirement. You can ask yourself what the solution looks like, what can I do with it, what do I need to know to make it work, what does it do when something goes wrong. Those are all part of the design, but they're also part of the requirements. And the BA is involved in eliciting and documenting requirements that could actually be considered to be design statements. Not all requirements are what. How can be a requirement too. And we go on. I'm saying that my how is your what. And in the interchange of thoughts as we move through requirements and design, often it's the person who's providing the requirements who's asking, how can we manage all the paper in this place? And the business analyst, the elicitor, or the designer, if you like, is saying, what you need is a document management system. So how do we get one? We can buy what we need. How do we store or index, retrieve? And the answer would be what you do. So the hows can be requirements, and the whats can be the design. When we get to how does it work, how do you develop the code, how did you test it, well, that's our trade secret, and that is technical design. So we are designing the solution only at the level of the business, on the surface, as we saw in the examples, and not about what's happening inside. But certainly from the surface, the BA is intimately involved in the design of the business solution. And that's why I believe that BAs have a definite place in design. And that's my say.
Thank you so much, Janet. Scott, tell me a little bit about your perspective.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, now I think it'll be a little bit tough for us to have a lively debate because I'm so much in agreement with what Janet just talked to us about. When I think about requirements in design, I think about them as sort of alternating layers when you think from a top-down point of view. And if I tried to assign labels, I would say that requirements are the things that somebody needs to do in order to fulfill a particular design direction or achieve some design goals. And then those design goals only exist in the context of fulfilling the requirements that live above it in this sort of hierarchy. Next slide, please. And so when we think about the labels of requirements versus design, it really ends up that the debates that I've seen over and over again really end up putting it in the context of who you are or what role you play in the team determines whether or not you think a particular artifact is a requirement or a design. If your responsibilities are to understand market needs and communicate them to the team that's going to go build something, you're going to have a very different point of view than if you are one of the people who's building what they've been asked to do, right? Your definition of why and how are different for the same artifact. Next slide. Back one, please. There we go. And so to me, I feel like it's a little bit of a wheel spinning kind of exercise to try and put a universal label on a particular artifact of saying that it's a requirement or it's a design. And because the notions of why versus how or what, that perspective varies depending on what role you're playing on the team. And depending on who you are, one label or the other is going to make more sense to you. And if you're somebody who's not on the team, then I don't know that it really makes sense to try and assign a label because it doesn't help anybody get the job done. And that's my point of view.
Well said, and I particularly like that diagram with the various layers from requirements through to spec. Excellent, thank you. And Julian.
Thanks, Maureen. And I also agree with Scott and Janet that requirements and designs are different aspects of the same thing, and that I think where we're going to have some discussion is practically how do you deal with this. My experience has been that the discussion about requirements and designs has been based on a misunderstanding of people's relationship to solutions and needs. We tend to think that solutions and needs are different for a stakeholder, but another way of thinking of this is that different stakeholders see one thing different ways. Next slide, please. And what that means from a practical point of view is, take a look at it, say, nuclear power versus coal power. For some people, that's a solution. One is a solution and one is a need. One is an opportunity. For other people, one is a problem or a disaster even. So the question really becomes, for whom is this a solution? For whom is this a need? What is the context for the thing? Now, from a BABOK point of view, in version 2, we really don't talk very much about design. In fact, that was very much a design decision about version 2. And the definition of requirement really could encompass design. But we sort of sidestepped the discussion because it was very contentious, and we didn't think that it would necessarily advance the profession to have that embedded in the body of knowledge. In version 3, we intend to change that. Next slide, please. And the way we're intending to change that is by redefining or defining need, defining solution, and defining requirements and designs relative to those core concepts. So in version 3, what we're proposing is a requirement is a usable representation of a need, and a design is a usable representation of a solution. Representation could be a document, could be a discussion, it could be interpretive dance, I suppose. That might be stretching it, but it's a representation of something. It's not the thing itself. It could be the picture of the Lamborghini or the diagrams showing the way that the iPod is going to be laid out. Those are both representations of a thing. They're not the thing itself. The picture of the iPod can't play music. So usable means that somebody, somewhere, is going to be able to do something based on that representation. This means that the thing that you need or the solution that will satisfy that need is distinct from the way you talk about it or the way you represent it. And I think where a lot of BAs and others get tied up in knots is thinking that there's something privileged or special about the way that I represent something. And that's not really the point, right? The point isn't to have a beautiful document. The point is to have a product that people can use or a solution that satisfies a real need at the end of it all. So from a logical point of view and as well as a practical point of view, there is real evidence that requirements and designs are really different names for the same thing, because needs and solutions are different names for sometimes the same thing. And that's my opinion. We can pass it back to Maureen.
Well, thank you very much, Julian. I thought that tied together all of the different perspectives very nicely and from different views, different approaches from different stakeholders. So we're going to start to move into some questions with the panelists. Don't forget at Twitter, #BABOK. Quite a few comments, and most of the audience who have commented do believe that the BA is responsible for design at some level. So let's explore some of their comments. Here's one, and I kind of like this comment. This is from Mark. And he says, I can see the BA as an architect, not just the sales agent getting the high-level requirements, but getting the detailed requirements and creating the wire structures, and I'm paraphrasing for you, Mark, different structures for the engineers and builders to bring it to life. Any comments on that?
I'm kind of curious about the idea of the architect. I mean, I've thought about that a fair bit myself since I've previously held the role of enterprise business analyst, and everybody asked me, well, is that a business architect or an enterprise architect or something like that? In all of those roles, though, I found that the diagram that Scott had put up really applied. Like, I was dealing with why, what, and how at one level, and the people who had to do projects based on what I did were dealing with why, what, and how at a different level. And I didn't even necessarily get down to high-level requirements. Sometimes it was just business objectives. And there was a lot of selling of business cases involved in those roles. Scott, do you, I mean, you do a lot of work with a lot of different organizations, don't you? Is that your sort of experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what drove me to pull the diagram together, from having the different conversations with different stakeholders. Everybody has a different point of view about what one particular aspect of the project is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I must come in there and just agree with both of you that I didn't go as far as the why, but they're all aspects of the same thing from different viewpoints.
So what do you guys do when, that engineer says, hey, that's my job. Like, I'm supposed to be doing that documentation.
Well, that's easy. You want to do the documentation. That's cool. What are you going to put in it?
I'm not sure if that was passive or aggressive or passive-aggressive. Was that...
All of the above.
So does that, like, what does that lead to? Does that lead to a negotiation about, like, a RACI chart or something like that?
It can be. Generally, I actually don't try to do, I try not to do the aggressive, and say, it's not my design or your design, it's not my document or yours, it's representing the product. And if you feel you can express it better than I can, then feel free to do so. But let's work together on producing a description of the finished product that will meet the need. It's always tempting to do the aggression, but I try not to in real life.
Jeff makes an interesting comment, or a comment that kind of ties into all of this. Jeff says, I believe that BAs do need to participate in the design activity, but that is a collaboration. And and manifests itself in an architecture and design. So what he's saying is that we maybe perhaps try to build a collaborative environment where we're all working towards the same thing at a different layer. And to Scott's point, maybe avoid using labels where it's design or otherwise, but talking about how do we produce the best solution that serves the why the customer needs it.
Well, I worry about the lack of labels in the sense that people do need to name the thing that they are doing, and in a very practical sense, I need to be able to say, what my work is as a BA, and a developer or an engineer or a scientist or whoever is going to be actually building something needs to be able to talk about what they're doing too. And if we use no name or all the same name, that might get confusing. So while I'm all for collaboration, at some point we have to say, this isn't the same as that. So Scott, what do you do about that in your experience?
Most of the time, things end up getting labels that are neither requirement nor design, but that describe what the artifact is, and then depending on who you are in the team, you can interpret that as a requirement or a design. And any particular conversation tends to refer to them inconsistently as being requirements or designs, depending on who's having the debate.
Right.
There's some things like business requirement and interface design where you can't really get around it, but you would still have a conversation where let's say somebody creates some mock-ups of a user interface design. The reason they did it was to achieve some goals of effectiveness for a particular user persona. Mm-hmm. And then that interface design gets handed off to a developer who sees that design as his specifications or as his requirements.
Yeah.
And so, to the designer, it's a what, or a how even, and to that developer, it's the why, who's then going to go build his code to make that real.
Scott?
Yes.
I'm tying into what you just said, that the developer sees it as the why. Mark Sancietta, and I'm sorry, Mark, if I didn't pronounce your name correctly, he says he runs into challenges when the business tries to code a solution and not focus on what the problem is or the why.
Absolutely, right. I see that is a universal endemic problem, and I really don't think about it as a labeling issue. I think about it as a trust issue, and it gets back to Julian's earlier comments about having a RACI or collaboratively, informally having the equivalent of a RACI, where you want the business folks or the stakeholders who have an area of expertise to contribute from their strengths, and then trust the development team or whomever to be most effective in their area of strength. You don't want a CFO telling you that a button should be red, and you don't want an interface designer telling you that you need any controllers and a VAT model or whatever. Right? Everybody should be in a situation, for a team to work effectively, everybody should be in a situation where they trust the other members of the team to do the things that they are best at doing.
So Scott, you've got a lot of shoulds in there, and that shoulds are a dangerous word for requirements. Because the reality is that in a lot of cases that trust isn't there, or it's a new vendor, or it's a COTS product, or you've never spoken to the person 3 levels up in the organization who you have to elicit requirements from about that business objective that didn't make any sense, because why would you spend $7 million on something that doesn't work, and so on. So practically, if you're, as a BA, I can't spend all my time just building relationships or building trust, because by the time I've done that, the project's over, and maybe wrong. So, practically speaking, what do we do about this?
Yeah, well, I'll throw. I think your points are really valid. And trust is earned, especially in an interpersonal level. But sometimes in a business environment, trust has to be anointed or delegated. I'll usually start out a conversation with the team by saying, here's my promise to you. Right, I'm going to tell you what I believe is required of you. And I'm going to trust you to build it in the right way. And I might throw in some inputs because I used to develop software, and so I've lived in your world before. And if I throw out comments like, hey, why didn't you do automated regression testing, or how come you're not using continuous integration, or wouldn't it just be easier to do it this way versus that way, those are just comments from Scott the person, not Scott the guy in my role.
I guess I've tried to focus those conversations on my role maintaining alignment to purpose. Like when I'm writing requirements at whatever level, there's a component of that which is saying we're doing this because X, we're trying to support this objective or this business goal or something along those lines. And I tend to ask those questions, whether it's getting down into design. Excuse me just a moment. I'm going to let somebody else speak while my dogs bark.
I don't think your dog agrees with you, Julian.
I think there's some serious disgruntlement on those topics. So I guess I try to pull people back to that focus on why we are doing this at all. But when you get down into data elements or wireframe, like really the details, you're no longer really aiming towards that original purpose. At least it's not in the documents. You're looking at how am I going to build this thing.
I'll chime in real quickly. So I think I got lucky in that early on I had the misfortune to work with some fairly bitter and thrice tricked development teams who anything you asked them to do, they said, why are we doing that? And so I really got that, and I needed to have that justification in that conversation as part of the communication. And I really got that sort of burned into my DNA early on to where, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's great that you mention it in this webinar setting. That's the ultimate, that's the most important part of the communication. I sort of have it hardwired in now, so I kind of do it on autopilot. Other thing I was going to say was that it seems like 80 or 90% of the conversation is around the lower level stuff because that's where 80 or 90% of the activity is. But you absolutely have to have that those conversations that set the context of why I'm doing something, and then show the traceability up to whatever level of abstraction is not so abstract as to be meaningless.
Janet?
Yeah, I must jump in there because I was anticipating what Scott was going to say, and he went off in completely the opposite direction. I worked originally with some thrice-tricked business people who now have the attitude that they'll never trust another developer because they tell them exactly what they need and they don't get what they need. So when the CFO says that button must be red, I come back and say, why must the button be red? And try to link back to what we're trying to achieve. What is the message he's trying to achieve by specifying the design?
So Janet, how do you do that without getting fired?
Oh.
I'm small and cute.
Okay, well that's some options I don't have.
Yeah, I don't have that either, so I have to build the relationships. But I think that's exactly the right stuff to be doing.
And, I think a lot of what you're saying really, Camille Peterson kind of summarizes a little bit. And Camille, bear with me as I'm going to paraphrase your note. That basically she says when we're working through requirements and they try to get to the detail like the button, it's really about understanding why, and so that the solution can really represent the needs of the business. And it could be something completely different than what they expect, but by handling their needs, you're actually even though the solution may not have a red button, again, Camille, I'm paraphrasing, it's doing what they need it to do. And the relationship development and communication is all about tying that together.
Yeah, that's where I was trying to go. That it's a question of saying to the CFO, not why do you want that, but to try to give you the best solution possible. Perhaps we could understand what a red button means to you in that place and move forward from that.
So asking why but being tricky about it.
It's nuanced, I think, because
Yeah.
very few people do a good job of telling you why they need something, right? People don't tend to describe their problems. In my experience, they tend to describe problem manifestations, or even
Yes.
worse, they tend to describe solutions that they've imagined without bothering to tell you what it is the problem that solution is intended to solve really is.
Yeah, and that's why you've got to find some fairly clever questions to trick them into giving you, to actually exploring and giving you the answers that they've got, but they don't realize they've got them.
Exactly.
So that brings us to the rabbit hole then, or I don't know, the beanstalk, because you can go, like up and up and up and up, why and why and why and why, and it can be hard to know when to stop. Or you can go down into the weeds, and it can be hard to know when to stop. So I have an approach to figuring out when to stop, but I'm curious about you guys, like Janet. How do you know when to stop asking why?
Well, firstly, seriously judging the person's level of irritation. They will get to a point where being small and cute isn't going to get away with asking why for the 27th time.
Right.
But also there's always a law of diminishing returns. The difference in the fourth answer and the sixth answer and the eighth answer is getting closer and closer. And
Okay.
I think you just get a feel for when it's enough.
And I completely agree. The piece I would add is I try and go one level past what I think is directly relevant, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. I'm not a fan of the 5 whys approach to elicitation because, not small and cute, and why is a challenging and irritating question, but also because it doesn't, it's an arbitrary limit to how many times you look for a decision, or how many times you go back up looking for a rationale. I tend to stop when the person who is going to use the artifact or use the requirements to do something, when they say they've got enough so that they can do the right thing. So that, sometimes that involves bringing together the person who I'm eliciting from and the person who's supposed to do something about that, and getting them to at least hear the same words or see the same picture on a whiteboard. Because that, I have found that tends to short-circuit a lot of the rigmarole that you can go through when you're trying to go from the requirements to the designs, and then ultimately to something that actually delivers value.
Thanks, Julia.
And that brings us straight back to... No, sorry.
And that brings us straight back to collaboration?
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can switch gears a little bit, if that's okay, panelists?
Sure.
Sure.
Awesome. I love the discussion, and Juliet, I particularly love the word rigmarole because it does. The diagrams and a lot of people on in our audience have been talking about wireframes and representations. And the suggestions that you all made are really good. My eyeballs were opening and going, yeah, I'm going to try that next time. I want to switch gears a little bit because there's been a couple of comments on from the audience on COTS, and David Omari brings up a scenario that we might be able to discuss about. He says, I worked on an IT software integration project for a government agency who had commissioned 2 software suppliers to provide the solution. As a BA, I found it very challenging to get the 2 suppliers to agree and document the detailed design of the solution. I.e. how the solution of the 2 systems will work and fit together. I also felt helpless as I did not have technical background and detailed knowledge of each system. Hence, the integration failed. Any advice from the panel? It's a tough one.
Well, I think the first mistake that a lot of organizations make when it comes to COTS, so commercial off-the-shelf software solutions, is thinking that because you're buying a package that you don't have to do all the normal stuff you would do if you were building it yourself. And the problem is that you know, if you were to buy any tool, if you bought a vacuum cleaner for your home and never considered where you're going to plug it in, whether it can do carpets and stairs, whether you have carpets and stairs to do, where you're going to store it, who's going to use it, if it's too big or too small. Like if you didn't do those requirements at some level, then you're quite likely to end up with a tool that you can't use, or you can't maintain, or you can't afford to maintain. So COTS software, you know, COTS systems are the same issue, and my experience anyways has been that you really have to go right back to the beginning and ask the questions, the same questions you would always ask. And that's not necessarily about technical experience, that's or knowledge. That's frequently just, it's about business knowledge. But there's another piece here about contracts and like vendor relationships, which is a big deal as well. But before I jump into that, I'll let somebody else register their opinion.
Well, I'll grab onto the word contracts and pick up on one aspect of things. What I've practiced in the past is what we call contract-based programming, which works when you have separate modules or separate vendors, separate systems that have to interoperate. You know, if you think about a flowchart, most flowcharts show what happens inside the boxes and sort of waves their hands at the fact that something usually happens during the arrows too. And right, that's the kind of thing that happens when you've got, as you know, I'm just sort of inferring from the description of the scenario, but if you've got two vendors who have to make their systems interoperate and neither of whom is willing to take ownership of that interoperation for whatever reason, the first thing I would do is drive an agreement from those two groups about the specifics of how their platforms will interoperate, nailing down the requirements and designs and getting both teams to agree. And then you've got a line in the sand that specifies what is required for the two systems to work together that both teams agree on. And when you run into contentious things where they don't agree, that gives you a framework for escalation. In terms of having the technical depth to drive that forward, I think that's a little bit of a tough line. I think you have to have some technical depth, and the forthcomingness and communication abilities of the technical people you're working with sort of define how much technology understanding you need to have to be effective communicating with them, because you don't always find technologists who can explain stuff in non-technology terms.
Can I jump in there with the technology depths of understanding? I was faced with a very similar problem in a project, and I managed to co-opt one of the technical people from the organization that I was working for to sit with me in the negotiations between the two teams. And he tended to try to write down the interface specifications as they were talking. He was totally incapable of facilitating a discussion or managing the human relationships, but with me there facilitating and him providing the technical input, we got over the problem of not having one person who could do both. And there we are, back to collaboration again.
You know that in version 3, the elicitation knowledge area we're proposing is going to be renamed elicitation and collaboration. So,
yeah.
Yes, there you go. I have been in similar situations, but I've also been in places where there is a vendor contract with an organization providing, you know, a cloud service or a SaaS service or something like that. And in the contract, it is explicitly specified that I am not allowed to talk to the design team or that the business analysts can meet once every 2 weeks for 75 minutes, accepting the break. Like really specific things that constrain my ability to talk to the people who ideally I'd be collaborating with. Have you guys run into anything like that?
Not personally, but I have had friends who've been in a situation where there was one situation with somebody doing something for the military where they were not allowed to talk to any of the military people to find out how they used the system. And the BA had to write questions and pass them to an interpreter who would then go and get the answers from the military. And all I can tell you is that the system didn't work.
I haven't seen anything like that that was contractually limiting in that ridiculous level of detail. But I think that sort of the organizational analog is a lot of times not having access to your users or your customers, because sales folks are worried about how you manage the relationship, or somebody doesn't want to misset expectations in the market, or whatever reasons, right? So there are always some kinds of completely irrational or nonsensical constraints that we have to work around to be effective.
And Joan Zador, one of our audience members, kind of agrees. She says that she looks at all of her stakeholders as someone who contributes, and I am paraphrasing. But again, if you're not technically knowledgeable, and we can't know everything, it's good to have understanding of data transfer and things like that, but really bring on your project SME. And so we have team members and stakeholders and not being able to work with them, be it because of contractual restrictions. How does risk and design play? So what I see is if I can't speak to or get the right information, that's a risk to the solution. So any comments on that?
Well, in the project I was commenting, not only was it a risk with a high probability and a high impact, it eventually became a fact. There are times when if nobody's prepared to accept the risk and do something about it, it will be the downfall of the project.
Yeah, from a very conceptual point of view, risks are usable representations too. They're usable representations of a change, an undesirable change. I'm thinking my way back to the core concept model that we put together. And they're like requirements and like needs, requirements and designs in the sense that they need to provoke some sort of action. That's why you document them. That's why you represent them. So anytime where you are running into a situation where you don't have access to the right stakeholders, or you have some other kind of constraint on the kind of work you can do, documenting it as a risk is a very, very effective way of marshaling organizational backing.
Yeah.
Most organizations do know how to speak risk, even if they don't know how to deal with them very well. So at least you can get it on the table.
Well,
yes, I've been dealing with something like that right now, where a young BA is trying to get two parties to see each other's side, and she's not getting anywhere. The business people are just saying it's got to be done that way, and I suggested to her that she document the risk of doing it that way, which is it's going to introduce a major risk into the project. And it seems to be making the business people, as they hear the word risk, look at it again instead of looking at it as, oh, the developers don't want to do what we're asking them.
Yeah, Scott, I think you...
Yeah, it's a whole new way to communicate.
We've got a lot of lag on the line, so sorry we're talking over each other.
No, I think documenting risks is a great way to feed it into the organization, because as Julian said, that's the way organizations are sort of wired to think. The larger the organization, the more that's true.
Yeah, I think there's as a BA, while you wouldn't necessarily be managing the risks because you're not the one who's going to suffer the consequences for most risks. You're probably pretty good at documenting that kind of thing. And risks and requirements share a lot of characteristics. So like use your BA skills, even if you're not a risk manager or not trained to, in risk management and so on, you can use your BA skills to document those things appropriately, represent them. And some risks really do drive requirements. Not all risks are about the act of making the change. A lot of them are about what happens to the organization after the change is done, and those can be requirements and designs as well.
Thanks, Julian. And actually, that's a good segue, I think, into, again, I bring up COTS, but from a design perspective, we have someone asking a question about, well, if an organization buys a COTS off-the-shelf solution, we don't have a lot of leeway around design. And to your point, Julian, if there's a specific requirement needed by the business that isn't represented in the solution that could cause risk, how do you get around design issues and COTS software in general?
I'll throw out a first comment of open the scope of what you consider designable to be not just the software but also the process. If you're constrained to use a piece of software that doesn't already map to the way you do business, and you don't have the opportunity to, or you're limited in your ability to customize that off-the-shelf software, explore what you can do to change your process so that you are able to be effective given the constrained environment you're in of using that particular piece of software.
That's we all like that comment, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of organizations where we're going to buy a piece of software. I'm sorry, Janet, how about you go ahead?
No, it's fine. I was just agreeing with you. Please go ahead.
I just have all this barking in the background. I hope it's not disturbing the call. I've been in organizations where you buy a piece of software explicitly because you don't want to modify that software. It's not, a mission critical or a strategic differentiator, and then spend way more than the software costs to change the software to conform to a process, which is insane. But I put this down to accounting in some cases, and I don't mean accountants, but the way that businesses account for different aspects of their spend. I can spend $1 million on a piece of software and changing it, but I'm not allowed to spend $40,000 on updating a process because that's handled by a different group, or that wasn't in this budget. Like there are some insane decisions that happen around those things.
And far too often, the BA or the project as a whole is looked at as an IT project, and you've got to solve the entire problem with IT, and people don't look beyond, as you were saying, to looking at a way to incorporate into the solution process changes rather than trying to make IT solve everything.
Yeah, if IT was the solution to all problems, then we'd live in a very different world.
Wouldn't we just?
Yes. That's like when I used to work retail many, many moons ago, we all said, this job would be great if it wasn't for the customers. And, like IT would be awesome if it wasn't for users. The way people interact with the system is every bit as important as the system itself, if not more important.
Well, Julian, you bring up a really good point, and I've suffered this a little bit where people have said, this isn't the BA's realm, but when we get into UI design, usability has as much an impact on business as anything. And so the role of usability, the BA, and the design, any thoughts on that?
I have about 100, so I'll go not first.
I just have one. Make sure you're clear about who has what expertise. As a BA, you may have enough expertise to define the appropriate kinds of requirements for usability, but you may not, and you may need someone who has different expertise, more detailed expertise than you have.
I agree with you there. I'll just take it one step further and say if the choice is me making the decisions with limited user application expertise and leaving it to a 19-year-old techie who does everything in terms of, wouldn't it be cool if we added this widget here, I'll still take the role of doing that design rather than leaving it to my techie. Because those are the people who design things that nobody can use.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I have to agree. I was just going to say, and the root word of all of this is user, and so utilizing them as part of your usability testing can certainly help, even if you're not a UI expert.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with all of you, and I think it is a don't do something you're not trained to do and good at doing, and also be pragmatic about, what's the lesser of two evils. And then the third thing I would add in is, track and communicate the risk of a non-usability or a user experience person developing the user experience. It's like asking your plumber to wire your electricity.
I think that the challenge here is that most people do think that they know what they're doing. I use systems all the time. I know how to do that, and so there's an added layer of confusion. Like, I've had developers say to me, listen, you just go figure out what the business needs. I'll go figure out how to make it happen. And that's not an unreasonable approach to take. But when it also betrays this misunderstanding of the relationship between a requirement and design, that they're different aspects of the same thing. So if nothing else from this whole discussion, I think it's clear that we as business analysts need to know that we're dealing with the same kinds of things when we're talking about requirements and designs, and we need to be very flexible about where we draw the line based on our own experience and expertise and the stakeholders who we need to collaborate with, because otherwise you can end up spending all your time arguing about what a document should be called instead of actually doing stuff.
Yeah, and I just have another point on usability because it's sort of my thorn in my side a little bit. When I was working with a police unit, they were putting in a whole new data capturing system, which started at the very beginning of the police officer recording the issues. The reason the reason for this new system was not only updating it, but the data that they had was really messy because one of the root causes was the police officer, when inputting data, would make mistakes. So their data was all messy. And so one of the requirements was to remove and reduce errors. And so in the design and UI specification was that this was important. And so there's the how is you could have a drop-down list, you could have character recognition, all of those things. But the main issue was we need clean data, and those poor police officers in the middle of the dark after shooting, a suspect has to enter the street number and name. We need to help reduce those errors. So there's that crossover, and I think the BA needs to be very much involved in that why, because it can get lost in development.
I think that's a great example, and and the tip I would throw out to BAs when they're doing this stuff is to think that all of the whys are not created equally. Right, reducing errors in the inputted data is far less important than anything that affects the state of mind of the police officer. And so forcing them through some nightmarish interface is either going to cause them to not use it or cause them to do something that's more important less effectively.
Well said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard somebody say once that really good software is the software that gets misused. Bad software is the software nobody uses at all. So, like, you have to consider the circumstances that your user is going to be in, and things like their state of mind could be very relevant. BAs, we sometimes forget that BAs wield an enormous amount of power. Not directly, like most BAs don't have a budget or staff who report to them, but one BA working alone, making a bad set of specifications or things that that don't solve the real problem can destroy an organization by mistake. Because organizations can run blindly, and build things that just don't solve the problem, spend a lot of money, spend a lot of time, there's a big opportunity cost, and then, oops, we can't meet people.
And you're well said. We've actually traversed from design and the role of the BA architect, how and whys. We've moved into collaboration. We've talked about the fact that we need to look at risk in design and include processes where the actual physical design or the interface design, the physical design, contradicts. So we need to be flexible in looking at design as also processes. And now we've talked about the people side of design and how important that is. So we've covered a lot of ground, and we have 5 more minutes left. So I thought we could shift to something that is kind of pragmatic, which is documentation itself and design. And someone asked the question: if are business requirements the what, and this is classic, and are functional requirements really talking about design? We're kind of coming full circle, but I thought I'd address that question from a documentation perspective.
I'll throw out an answer of it depends on who's asking, and generally, yeah, that's sort of how I think about it.
I tend to... Oh, go ahead, Janet.
I was just going to say, we're back to the labels and who's applying the label. But the functional spec does tell somebody how it needs to be built. So at that level, yes, we are talking design, but it's only design from the perspective of the BA or the business itself. From the perspective of the developer, that's going to be their what?
Yeah,
or even their why.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is why I tend to shy away from using words like why and what and how and when. I mean, when is pretty clear.
Yeah.
Who is pretty clear. But why and how share a bunch of meanings. One has a human involved and the other doesn't, and so they can confuse people. I tend to think of functional requirements in terms of, and describe them in terms of benefits, things that you want to achieve or advances you want to make, and all the other requirements are usually about something like reducing a risk or reducing a problem or relating to a constraint. So like a lot of quality of service requirements don't provide benefits in and of themselves. They stop you from losing benefits because the interface is too slow or because it's crashing or things like that. Maybe I'm taking a page from Scott's book and trying not to label those things because it tends to cause confusion.
And thanks for that. And, that kind of brought us back to sort of at the beginning. And then I'm going to shift to someone who mentioned BA as the architect. Now, Ulysses makes a point that, design isn't necessarily just at the classic traditional requirements that state. He says, BA does a great job of covering IT BAs, designing and developing solutions, but where do enterprise BAs fall into all of this? Helping senior management develop and execute action plans and strategy and needs and requirements to find sustainable solutions. So there's a design element here.
Absolutely. As a recently enterprise business analyst, the way that the BABOK version 2 is designed, you're absolutely right. It assumes that you're on an IT project from a lot of the text. Version 3 is changing that so that it's more neutral and puts IT projects as a perspective along with things like enterprise business analysis. But the bottom line really is that you're doing all the same stuff. It's just that the system you're working on isn't an IT system. It's an organizational system. So I tend to deal with things like organizational capabilities or enterprise processes, end-to-end processes, rather than a set of interfaces between systems.
Yeah, I agree. I think of it as you're still painting. It's just acrylics versus watercolors. There are a few things in technique that are different, but you're really doing the same kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What I find to be challenging for a lot of folks is finding people that can have the conversation sort of all the way up and down that stack. Like if I thought about a specification that defined being able to measure usage of your application, and if you start working up the chain, you're doing that because you have a pricing. You need to be able to charge customers based on how much they use it, because you have a pricing model that is metered pricing, because you want to get a particular type of predictability in your revenue stream so that you achieve a particular market multiple in the marketplace, so that your Series A funding is whatever, or your stock price has, I mean, you can connect everything all the way up and down that chain, and it's people tend to specialize at one end or the other.
Thanks for that, Scott. And well, that brings us to the end of the session, although I'd love to keep talking about this, and I know that many of the participants would. Don't forget to take a screen capture, participants. There's some contact information. I cannot thank Scott and Janet enough for their insights, their advice, and Julian, needless to say, constant and wonderful contributor to the discussions around the BABOK and the concepts around business analysis. This webinar will be posted within 5 business days to our website, iiba.org. Thanks again, panelists, and thanks, participants.
Well, thanks for inviting us.